It's another Football Friday on News OK Live. I'm Mike Sherman, sports editor of the Oklahoman. Joining me are our columnists, Berry Tramel and Jenni Carlson, OSU beat writer Gina Mizell, and OU beat writer Jason Kersey. We'll get to their locales here in a second, but we're going to jump in right away. Joining us now, OSU beat writer Gina Mizell, and we'll just ask you the same question about the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Who's the Cowboys' best player, Gina?
Based on last week, I might say Quinn Sharp is the best player. If you're talking just relative to position, I mean, he's such a weapon for this team. Just with his ability to handle all the kicking duties, can make a tackle on a kickoff return and draws a key penalty that seals the game for the Cowboys against the Jayhawks. But I think if we're talking realistically, I think Joseph Randle is still the best player on this team. But if you're talking just best player relative to the position that they play on the field, Quinn Sharp might be the best in the nation. But so I'll go Joe Randle in just the season that he's had. Obviously, he was slowed down by Kansas last week, but he's such a dynamic weapon, such a key part of this offense. But I'll give a special tip of the cap to Quinn Sharp and what he's been able to do for his whole career, really. And
most valuable player, best player, most important player. Jenni, let's try to keep it on best. Who's the Cowboys' best?
I think it's Joe Randle. Now, last week, he did not look like the best player on the field. I was a little bit stunned at just how ineffective he was much of the day. And he just looked kind of black. It looked like he'd been watching film for 2 weeks of Kansas. And he realized, I'm going to run these guys over. And we didn't sort of see that inspired running that we saw the week before or 2 weeks before against Texas. If he'd run like he did against Texas, against Kansas, I don't know how many yards he would have run for, but I just really felt like he wasn't quite the same guy against Kansas. But when he runs motivated, he's as good as anybody in the country, not withstanding the league. So I think he's really having a great year. That 80-yard game a week ago was the first sub-100-yard game he'd had. So I think that kind of puts in perspective just how good a year he's had. And remember, in some of those blowouts in the non-conference, he didn't play very much. So for him to have 100-yard games in those games was pretty impressive. I think he's definitely their best player.
2 votes for Joe Randle. Berry, is there somebody else to think about here, or is it just Joe Randle?
My first thought is, like everybody else, Joe Randle. It's certainly not anybody on defense. But I don't think the idea of Quinn Sharp being their best player is silly. Vinegar Ben brought it up. I mean, the guy's an incredible weapon. If you got a really good punter, it helps your team. If you got a guy that kicks the ball into the seats on kickoffs, it helps your team. If you got a dependable field goal kicker, it helps your team. When those three things are all in one guy, that guy's incredibly valuable. I think, if we're talking best player, you might have to go with Joe Randle. But if you're talking most valuable, it's Quinn Sharp, I think, after whoever ends up being the quarterback.
Let's exclude those two guys from this question. Throw out Joe Randle, throw out Quinn Sharp, and think about Saturday's game in Stillwater. And tell me, Berry, where are the Cowboys going to go for a big play?
Well, I think they're going to have to go to the air. Iowa State didn't let them run last year. I don't know why they'd let them run this year. So I think they're going to have to go to that injured receiving corps. Some of the usual suspects aren't going to play, so I assume Tracy Moore, Isaiah Anderson aren't going to play. I think they maybe rediscover Blake Jackson. I don't know why he didn't do more Saturday at KU. Seemed to be missing in action, but he didn't catch the ball well early. Had a couple of drops at Arizona, but I thought he was good later. So I'll say Blake Jackson. He looks to me like he could make a bunch of plays.
Missing in action Jackson is Berry's pick. Gina, who you got?
I think Blake Jackson's a good pick, but I'll go with Josh Stewart just because he's been the Cowboys' leading receiver. If J.W. Walsh does play again this Saturday, obviously that chemistry is already there that we've talked about, so many times. And, he was reliable for Wes Lunt as well, too, when Lunt was playing. So he's been their best overall receiver this entire season, and they're really going to need him. Like Berry said, this receiving core is banged up, even if, some of the guys that got injured in the Kansas game are back, certainly aren't going to be 100%. So, one of those guys on the inside, whether it's Jackson or Stewart, I think is really going to have to step up and have a big game. And, Jackson's been inconsistent. I mean, he had a great game against Louisiana Lafayette a couple weeks ago, but then against Texas only had one catch. It was a key catch on that last drive, and then only had one catch, I believe, against Kansas, and was really only thrown to like 2 or 3 times. So it would be a good time for him to kind of come back and have a big game. But as far as, looking at someone that's consistent, I'll go with Josh Stewart.
Jenni, who are you going to call?
Well, I know you said rule out Joe Randall, but I think Joe Randall catching the ball out of the backfield is going to be a potentially huge outlet if J.W. Walsh ends up starting again. They really haven't thrown as much to him as I thought they might with J.W. Starting. He really is fantastic catching it out of the backfield, and we really haven't seen that very much out of him. So I would say that could be a huge play potential. But I'm with Berry on Blake Jackson. That guy has been, I'm not going to say a disappointment just yet, but I thought he would be a way more consistent, big option in the offense. And we just haven't seen it out of him. I know he's a new Division I player coming out of junior college, relatively young to the game of football as it is, but we just really have not seen those big plays out of Blake Jackson like I thought we would. Maybe this is where you start to see him turn the corner.
Staying on the Cowboys, guys, they are, by the way, the defending Big 12 champions with games against West Virginia, Oklahoma, still on their schedule coming up.
K-State.
And Kansas State. Their big games are before them, yet they're not really in anybody's conversation as a contender from the Big 12 title. Do you think we're wasting our time talking about the Cowboys, or can you see a scenario in which the Cowboys can get back in the thick, can be in the thick of the Big 12 title race? Jenni, start with you.
Oh, absolutely. And I wrote last week after that Kansas game that it would be really interesting to see in a month or so, or at the end of the season, how that game ranks. Is that a blip on the radar, sort of an off day, or was that a continuation of something we saw the rest of the year? And I don't know the answer to that. Obviously, they're very banged up right now. Some of that may change, some of it may not. So how that impacts things is yet to be determined. But clearly, this Big 12 race is as wide open as we've ever seen it. And it goes back to what I had said earlier, that you've really got 9 teams in this 10-team conference that could beat each other. Kansas is really the one team that doesn't have the talent, the ability right now to be a week in and week out threat. Now, they may beat somebody before the year's out in conference play, but you're not every week thinking, man, they could beat whoever they're playing. So that's really that really leaves a lot up in the air, and that includes Oklahoma State being able to maybe make a run here at another Big 12 championship. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility at all. I think it is that wide open in the conference.
Berry, how big is that maybe?
I don't understand where any optimism about OSU comes from, to be honest. They haven't done squat this year. Best team they've beaten is Kansas. And, yeah, they played well against Texas, but then Texas has been exposed. So, I'm waiting for the Cowboys to do something. I picked them third in the conference. So, I was optimistic, but they haven't done anything. And until they start stopping people, and until they start, keep taking care of the ball on offense and scoring touchdowns instead of field goals when they need them in tight games, I don't have much optimism about this OSU team. I think a conference title, they're not going to be in the conference title race. You can just watch them and see that. The key for this team now, I think, is get to a bowl game, because they got some very tough games. West Virginia and Tech and TCU, those are 3 home games that are just going to be dogfights, much less going to Manhattan and to Norman, to Waco. So Saturday against Iowa State. I think this Oklahoma State team, in my opinion, has been a massive disappointment.
Gina, do you concur?
I mean, I think I tend to lean more towards Berry than towards Jenni, just based on, what I've watched this season. And I mean, a lot of it is that there are a lot of unknowns. I mean, just the fact that Wes Lunt was out for now over a month is, it kind of just, you don't really know if you've seen the true Oklahoma State team. I don't think you have seen the true Oklahoma State team, just because they haven't had their starting quarterback. Most teams around the country, if they lost their starting quarterback, would sputter or just not look the same. So, and even when Lunt comes back, even if he does play tomorrow, I mean, he's not going to be. It's going to take a while for him to get back to where he was before. Todd Monken made that point on Monday, where he was like, "Listen, the way that he got as accurate and as good as he was he went through all of summer workouts as the number one guy during those 7-on-7 drills. He went through all of fall camp as the number one guy, and he went through the first 3 weeks of practice as the number one guy. So he's not just going to come back after a month and just, be Peyton Manning out there. It's just not going to happen. So with these tough games coming up, even with Wes Lunt healthy, whenever he is, I mean, I don't know how many games this team can win. And I tend to agree that it's going to be tough to make a bowl just because just because of the way that the Big 12 shakes out. Now, on the flip side of that, I do believe that there are games out there that they can win just because of this crazy race, and they do have weapons on offense. And, maybe if this defense can start forcing turnovers and start to play up to what we thought they would be this year, then of course things can turn around. But it's after that Kansas game, I think you almost got to readjust your expectations a little bit. I projected 8-4 with losses to Kansas State, to OU, and to West Virginia. And then I thought the 3 toss-up games would be Texas, Arizona, and TCU. And obviously I said, okay, they'll win 2 out of those 3 games. Well, they've already lost 2 of those. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But I think, I tend to lean more toward Berry than Jenni at this point.
I'll get you guys out of here with this one. The Big 12 game of the week, maybe the game of the year. Kansas State at West Virginia. Who do you got? Gina, you go first.
This was a tough one to pick. I picked West Virginia, I believe 35-31 or 38-35, something in that frame of mind. I think the fact that it's in Morgantown obviously helps West Virginia, and the fact that they lost last week and just got embarrassed by Texas Tech. If they had won that game, I think I might have picked Kansas State to win this weekend, which sounds kind of weird, but that was kind of my line of thought. So obviously I think Kansas State definitely can win, but I like West Virginia at home to bounce back after a really bad performance against Kansas State.
Jason Kersey, West Virginia, Kansas State. Who you got?
I got Kansas State. I would have picked West Virginia, I think, before last week, but the way they got beat by Texas Tech really exposed them, I think. And I think if Kansas State and Colin Klein can control the clock and play, and they've obviously shown they can play good defense, and I think their defense is better than Texas Tech. So I think Kansas State goes up there and gets the win.
Jenni, this one reminds me a little bit of the night the earth shook in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Last year's OSU West Virginia game. You were there. Who you got in this one?
Yeah, I'm going to go Kansas State in this one. This was a really tough game to pick, as everybody said to this point. West Virginia was my preseason favorite to win the conference, but I really like the way K-State's playing. And obviously that loss last week to me was, that was disappointing to see how poorly West Virginia played against Texas Tech. I mean, we knew their defense was not good, but to see their offense sputter like that was pretty surprising. I don't think K-State's defense is great. I don't think it's better than Tech's, but I do think that K-State doesn't beat itself. And on the road in a hostile environment like that, we saw it last week against Iowa State. Kansas State's not a team that, is going to blow people out, but they know how to win close games. They know how to win on the road. I think that comes in real handy against West Virginia. I think K-State goes up there and wins that game.
Be a big win. Barry, all my buddies in Edmond, they've been showing up on Sundays for church wearing their purple. Will they be wearing them on Sunday?
I would guess not. I think they're more likely to be wearing coonskin caps. I'm going to take the Mountaineers for this reason. I think Kansas State, sort of the last couple of years, been a very good team, but speed in the secondary, athletic ability is not one of their strong suits. The Sooners exploited it a year ago, did not exploit it the other night in Norman, which is a faux pas of Oklahoma's, one reason why the Sooners lost. I think West Virginia can do that with Austin and Stedman Bailey and those great receivers. I think West Virginia will score a ton. Kansas State will too, but I think West Virginia gets them.
Barry, that's interesting. We talked about that leading up to the game in Norman, how the speed was the difference. That's the reason why many of us, I think you included, picked the Sooners. Yet Bill Snyder found a way to make it about something else. Maybe he'll do it again this week. I do have West Virginia. I think it's a great game, and what will be interesting to see is whether that game is the game that decides the Big 12 championship or that game in Norman. We'll have to watch and see. But that's all for this edition of the Football Friday Hangout on News OK Live. You can stay with the best coverage team every day in the Oklahoman and all the time on newsok.com.